Hello, I'm Frost, and welcome to my first impressions of Hardspace Shipbreaker, the zero-G deconstruction game. I spent about 10 hours playing Hardspace Shipbreaker, and this is what I found out so far. Welcome back. So, Hardspace Shipbreaker, it is not your typical game. Normally with these types of games, you end up building things and you try and acquire funds. But this time it's completely the opposite. In fact, what you do is you dismantle ships the slow way rather than my usual way, which is to crash ships into things and disassemble them very quickly. This time you are dismantling them and trying to pay off a debt. Now this debt comes because you've decided to take on the career of shipbreaker for a company called Lynx, but the way that Lynx works is you have to basically indenture yourself to the tune of $1 billion of debt, and your DNA is owned by the company, which we'll come to in a minute. And so therefore your task is to break down these ships and in turn earn enough money to pay off your 1 billion debt. So essentially the way that it works is every shift you pay to rent all of your equipment and the facilities in order to be able to do the work. And you work in a zero-G environment, and obviously you have your ship in front of you there that you need to cut up into pieces. But it should be worth mentioning as well, it's not a complete zero-G environment, it's got kind of like a dragnet around it. So in other words, if you move things very slowly in space, they won't continue to move forever very slowly, they will eventually come to a halt, as if there is almost some kind of sort of something just holding things a little bit in place. Obviously if you wang something across space, then it will disappear off into the ether. But if you do things slowly, then you can keep everything fairly contained. Now, basically, it starts off with we have a scanner. And with this scanner, you can see, like, for example, the yellow points are the points where you can cut. So it gives you an idea of how you chop up your ship. Now, unfortunately, not all the cutting points are on the outside. Some are, and that gets you started at the beginning. And then eventually you have to work your way through the bowels of the ship, cutting various structural points so that everything starts to eventually come apart. Now you have two main tools to do this. You have your cutters and your grabbers. And each of those you have two. So if we start with the grabber, for example, you have the first tool, which is essentially what's called the Grappler, and it is a tractor beam. And with it, you can grab hold of an object, and as you turn, it works almost like a whip, and you can whip things around in different directions, letting them go at the right moment to blast them off into the right direction. You also have the ability to push an object, so that if you are facing directly behind the object and give it a push, it will then move away from you. Then, obviously, before you can grab hold of objects to fling them into the various areas, you also need a cutter, and you have two types of these. The first one is a precision cutter, which is a single beam, which isn't anywhere near as powerful, but makes sure that you don't blow stuff up, as we'll come to in a minute. And then you have the strip saw. And the strip saw, you can switch from vertical to horizontal, so you don't have to always orient yourself. You can use your tool to do that. And then you can cut through large slices at a time. And then on top of that, now this isn't actually mentioned in the tutorials, but you can actually also use your gloves. So with the on the PC with the Z and X key, you can actually grab onto objects to stabilize yourself, or you can actually use your hands to move objects around in space, which can come in handy when you're in very tight spaces. So once you've actually detached these parts, then you have to actually put them in the right place. So anything that's scrap goes in the furnace. Anything that is a recyclable material goes into the processor, and anything that's a full component, like an atmospheric unit or a cockpit display, something like that, is a component, and that goes onto the barge that is below. That's the green item. Now, unfortunately, the tutorials are not great, and you will struggle at the beginning of the tutorials, simply because they don't tell you this, and you don't quite know where everything's supposed to go. You then eventually figure out that when you grab an object, it actually tells you in the middle of the screen whether it needs to go into the furnace, the processor, or onto the barge. But you have to remember that sometimes some objects, like for example a handle, is actually connected to an item that can go into the processor. So you have to remove the handle, put that in the barge, and then put the item into the processor. Otherwise you're actually losing money. And as you work your way through your ships, you'll start to understand what is valuable, what isn't, what needs to be detached from what. But you have to be very careful when cutting. Especially, you do not want to die. Now, the best way to die is to actually cut through the engine reactor or cut through the fuel tanks, which I have done. or even the fuel lines can cause fires which will damage you. You can get electrocuted from electronics, and if you cut through the coolant tanks, then potentially you can freeze, and it makes everything brittle, and everything then falls to pieces rather than being cutting into objects you can then salvage. And dying is definitely not good, because that costs you an absolute fortune. If you remember at the beginning, I said your DNA was owned by the company. So if you die, you don't clear off your debt, you actually increase it, because they just clone you, you're back again, and you're back to cutting with an even bigger debt than you had before. Now, the way that the game works is it works in 15-minute shifts. Now, ideally, you want to try and finish off in as many shifts as you can, because every 15-minute shifts, you have to pay to rent the equipment and the facilities in order to cut your ship. So actually, the reality of it is you have to decide whether, once you've actually sort of finished a shift, whether you want to continue a second shift, as to whether you will be able to cut up enough stuff and salvage enough stuff to make it profitable. If you think you can, then you do another shift. If you think you can't, then you give up and then you move on to a new shift. Now, progression is actually very good. First of all, you get experience, and that experience is just from doing the job, just like any other job, and you get to learn where to cut and how to strip quickly, and the best approach to take, whether you should go into the inside first and decompress it and cut all the inner bits first so the whole ship separates, or you may like to go at the beginning and start from the front, work your way to the back, whichever. But either way, you're getting experience of the best approach to take. Then you also have a leveling up, and this leveling up is based around certification. So as your certification level goes up, you get access to more complex and more valuable ships, but also you get access to better equipment. So coming onto that, there is an equipment upgrade path, and you get points towards your equipment. So for example, with your cutter, with the cutter, you can increase your range, you can increase its heat capacity, so you can run it for longer, and its cooldown can be increased so that if you do start to overheat, it recovers a lot faster. Then your grapple, you can increase the range of it, you can increase the strength, so you can pull on heavier objects. And then your tethers, and I can't remember if I mentioned the tethers, but the tethers work very similar to the grapple. But what happens is that they can pull much heavier objects, and you can daisy chain them. So when you put some tethers on, you can put multiple tethers on, and then you can then point a tether towards, let's say, the processor, and it will then grab multiple objects and pull them all in one go, and it works very much like a rubber band. I think that's probably the best way of describing it. And then coming back to the equipment, the upgrades, so with the tethers, you can increase the quantity of tethers you can buy at a time and use, and also the duration of the tethers. And then finally, you can do equipment upgrades like to your thrusters, so that you can move more efficiently, your helmet so you have more oxygen, your work suit so that you have better maneuverability, and obviously your scanner as well, so you get more information on your scanning. So my final impressions on this is that it's a stable game. For an early access game, it is very stable, I have to say. I've not had like major crashes or anything like that, and it is definitely playable, and it's a very chill experience. You kind of settle down and you can get into your cutting mode, which is very pleasant. The Western style music is kind of fun at first, but I found that after a few 15-minute shifts, I turned it off and put my own music on the background, and that worked much better for me. Unfortunately, the lack of oxygen and movement speed at the beginning of the game is quite annoying, because you spend a lot of time during your shift having to go back to the main structure to obtain more oxygen. And it takes a while to get there and takes a while to get back, and you kind of lose a lot of your shift time. So I would say that the first upgrades you want to do are to your movement speed and to your oxygen levels, and that will allow you to get more time out of the game. Also, the saves, you should be aware that the in-game it only saves at the end of the shift. If you actually haven't completed a shift and you quit the game, it will not come back mid-salvage of the ship. It will go back to the beginning of the salvage, which is a little bit annoying. So you need to be aware of that. But overall, I think it is a very unique game. It has its own style. It has loads of possibilities for expansion. And I'm really interested to see where this goes. But I can highly recommend Hardspace Shipbreaker. It is a great early access game and very entertaining and very unique. And that's it for me. So hope you liked that. If you did, please give me a like. You can dislike too, that's okay. Please be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon for notifications. I do release regularly. And I no longer stream on Twitch now. I now stream on YouTube. and that's on a Wednesday and on a Saturday. And just keep an eye on my community posts, or just check the channel and you will see that I normally post that a day or two ahead, so you know when it's going to be on. And that's it from me. I hope you enjoyed it. See you soon. Take care. Bye.